My name is Kycell and I, along with my good friend Ahani, are racing against yet another clock. This time, to rescue our companion, Tristafé Myrink, from the clutches of the mercenary school she fled from so many years ago. All thoughts of concluding this literary work, storying King Krunturg's reign of Goldenrod, fled to the recesses of my mind, as Ahani and myself fled down the stairs of the makeshift fraternity-turned-knights headquarters. If Lieutenant Valwen's information was correct, Myrink might be in danger whether the forces of the Rajel Assad and Pagas royal family know of her betrayal or not. During our time in the mines, I had learned much of Myrink's past, her time as a mercenary and sometimes assassin. She made her time training underneath the sharpshooter named Odegra seem both adventurous at times, but more often quite nightmarish. She explained that her few years under the Lavrise de Cher roof came to an impromptu halt when she fled the school and her mentor after refusing to take a job that would put her family in danger. It seems fate has had other plans for her. We exited the house and began to flee down the streets of Goldenrod. However, in passing, I noticed many of the kingdom's citizens seemed to be in a panic, sealing doors, slamming windows, or else seemingly packing for what looked like a lengthy departure. I feared the attack must have started without us noticing. Had the Rajel Assad and Pagas' small-sized detachment of half-orcs loyal to Prince Dinge, or the enormous ogre mercenaries, likely paid by the Rakshasa princess's family, entered the town already? Putting my hand on Ahani to stop her from going on without me, my scholarly inquisitiveness got the better of me. I grabbed a single merchant who was hurriedly removing the most expensive stock from the outside of his bodega. I asked the harried man if Goldenrod was under attack. He simply looked at me, dumbfounded.
No, not yet. The entire castle's been reduced to rubble. They say the prince has gone mad, tearing down everything in Minda's castle, and the city's next.
Truly, one horrible piece of news begets yet another. As we continued to travel towards Minda's castle, the merchant's words swam in my head. At first, I was certain he was simply mistaken, and thought he meant the destruction of the dungeon tower by Valwen's forces. But as we approached the crossroads, where the forest swamp, Goldenrod Kingdom, Scalamandre Port, and Minda's castle converged, I was clearly mistaken. Nearly every tower that was visible from leagues away was utterly reduced to rubble. We slowed our pace, fearing what might be the cause. Valwen assured us the grenadiers used nearly all of their explosive gear, and that only resulted in the partial collapse of the dungeon. As we walked on, the scale and cause of the destruction was made clear. The ogre mercenaries seemed to be in overdrive, atop their enormous Catoblepas mounts, and the leads or chiefs riding those much more gargantuan, tusked and pink-furred behemoths that even dwarfed their hulking peers. They were smashing into every tower, every gate, every castle wall in sight. When the piles of debris grew too tall, they draped them in massive nets and hauled them away out of view. The sight and raucous noise was beginning to cause me sensory overload. I could hardly think. Luckily for both of us, Ahani was made of much tougher stuff than I. She roughly cuffed me on the shoulder and aimed my attention to a magnificently Baroque carriage. It seemed to be drawn by a pair of monumentally large spaniels. They had spotted white fur and ostentatiously groomed ears that didn't seem to have been marred during what was likely a lengthy journey. The pair of elephantine dogs didn't seem to be bothered or even notice the loud and dangerous havoc surrounding them. I shouted at Ahani, inquiring what should we do next. Head for the remains of the castle entrance? Head to that carriage? Or if she had a better plan? Still partially covering her ears as we held our heads close together, she surveyed the ruinscape around us until she once again spotted something that I had missed. A handful of orcs were circulating back and forth from the half-standing director's tower, where we went when we first arrived at the castle looking for work, and were assigned our roles by the non-Rakshasa catfolk that referred to himself as the proprietor. Thanking the fact that our magically induced disguises still maintained their effect one more day, we fled in that direction, avoiding swinging tusks, yelling ogres, and stomping hooven feet. As we entered the remains of the director's tower, which seemed so fanciful with its golden walls and buttresses a week or so ago, we saw the area seemed to have been made into a temporary headquarters like the Morongo Knights had done, but also a partial triage clinic. A number of burned and wounded half-orcs groaned while rolling back and forth on makeshift cots. One or two catfolk and faces I seemed to have recognized from the medical university ran from patient to patient, checking wounds and offering water. While Ahani scanned the beds for our mouseling, I was locked in to a scene playing out on the headquarters portion. Prince Dinge, the hulking, demoniac, toad-like son of my kingdom, Princess Walla, the youthful Rajalasad Royal, and the Regent Mother Selva, all hunched on one side of a war table. On the other were three female figures I didn't recognize. The closest to me from the table was a brutish, four-armed figure. Each limb was equally brawny and uncomfortably vascular, with visible veins like plant roots from elbow to shoulder. Her skin was corpse pale, but her terrifyingly sharp-clawed hands were burning red, as if she had recently dipped them into some sort of lava or blood. She wore what looked like a tattered jet-black battle gown, with lank, straight black hair draped over her eyes. Despite her severe and intense appearance, she seemed to be jovially chatting with the princess, whose responses and demeanor were rather apathetic, a manner that I've noticed she seems to permanently display. The second figure, to my surprise, seemed to be a stout and potentially offshoot breed of Minotaur. Her stature, when compared to mere kind, resembled the difference between a regular human and your common dwarf. While kind and the depictions of Krunturg I've seen, their faces and horns were extremely bull-like, but this woman seemed to have the countenance of a Cape buffalo, a much wider face and snout, with horns that met at the crown of her head, then down along the sides of her face and ending in sharp upward points. Her fur was dark black. She wore hefty brown woolen robes that emphasized her incredibly stooped posture, and she seemed to be putting her considerable weight onto a golden staff that was nearly twice her height. The final figure was a very unassuming and gentle-faced elven woman. Her hair was bright blonde, and her outfit was a simple black and white, lax-fitting habit. Two odd things I took note of, however. Firstly, she seemed to never open her eyes during the entire exchange, but she seemed to have a constant, placatingly calm smile. The second peculiar thing was the likely religious talisman she had draped around her neck on a chain that she clutched between her hands. It seemed to be a shirtless, humanoid male in tattered pants, but with the head and wings of a housefly. It matched no race or gods I had ever seen before. I pointed Ahani to the gathering, wondering if we should eavesdrop for information regarding Myrink. This curious collection was more than likely the members of the Lavrise de Cher school we'd been warned about. But in my studying of the trio, Ahani noticed another group, separate from the half-orc underlings and guards. I turned my attention to the other side of the tower and was struck horrified. In one cot was the mutant satyr assassin Fugazi. A large portion of his upper right side was seemingly missing, exposing bone and flesh to the outside world. But his entire body seemed to be pulsing rhythmically. I figured he must be recovering in some horribly unconventional way. On a separate pair of beds were the two ogres that Myrink was reported to have shot. There were two further closed-off sections with cloth walls erected for some sort of privacy. Ahani made her way over quickly, leaving me behind and gesturing for me to listen in on the group. So I stayed. Dinge's meaty, warty fist pounded the table, snarling and growling something about his father, King Ludope.
He shames me. He values these orc slaves more than me gaining land and respect.
Princess Wallabunga offered a placating paw to calm the prince, with a quick look of fear darting over her face as her eyes seemed to scan the air around them. Dinge shoved her from him, and the four-armed woman tensed. She seemed protective of the young princess.
My father's mind won't reach me here. The messenger's head crumpled after he delivered my father's last command.
He stepped back from the table and began to pace, with his hands folded behind his back.
My brother and sister left some time ago. I am to return to Wolfkeep tonight. Silva, you are free to take that mutant back to Mantiacha City and give his master my father's best regards. Voila, you are to return to your training with these flesh pounders.
With a nod, Regent Mother Selva hefted her immense and terrifying warbow, then turned to the princess, who performed a leaping hug on to the strange older catfolk woman, tears welling in the young princess's eyes. When Selva bent down to give Walla a kiss on the top of her head, I finally realized what her role was. While Walla was one of the perpetually reincarnating Rakshasa of the Virgelisad family, Regent Mother Selva must have been her most recent biological mother. The two separated, with Walla retreating to the four-armed woman's embrace, and Selva headed in Ahani's direction, towards the rapidly recovering Fugazi. Before she left the eyesight of Dinge, he raised his meaty claw for her to halt.
One more thing. My father doesn't suffer failed annexation lightly. We must save face. Meet me outside.
I watched on as the two retreated from the tower and back out into the light of day, with the princess and the trio of Lavrise de Cher matriarchs, who Dinge referred to as flesh pounders, left standing around the table. I continued to eavesdrop. The first one to speak was the wizened Cape Buffalo member.
Well, it's good to see that the prince is still a brat after all these years. Now, I hope you're ready to get back to work, young Walla. Odengra finished picking up our little wayward mouseling in the carriage, and we're ready to boat home soon.
The muscular four-armed woman hissed in agreement and began scooting Walla out of the tower, followed by the still smiling and pendant-clutching elf woman, who muttered something that sounded like buzzing noises, and finally, the Cape Buffalo Minotaur. I finally knew where Myrink was, and she was practically right under our noses. I fled through the clinic and past the now upright-sitting Fugazi, who flexed a currently fleshless right arm. Then I passed through the cloth walls to the separate section. I was immediately greeted with a sight of a paralyzed in fear Ahani. Following her eyeline, I saw the now much less dehydrated form of Lord Natanus Carnager half-elven. He was clutching the limp form of a male medical worker who seemed to be missing his head. Carnager's eyes seemed glazed, blank, and mindless, but he greedily sucked and lapped at the stumped neck of the poor worker. At his feet were a number of bodies, equally headless half-orc guards, strewn all over dropped linens and bedsheets. I also found myself unable to react beyond abject fear, until a distant explosive sound shook me and Ahani. We gave each other a brief glance, then fled the quartered-off room, and the director's tower in totality, as far-off distant explosions continued to ring out. Back in the destruction of the courtyard, I pointed out the carriage to Ahani this time, and told her Myrink was already aboard and heading to Scalaramandri port any minute now. Before we could approach, more distant explosions rang out. We turned to the noise and saw the Regent Mother, Warbow embedded into the ground as she drew ballista-sized arrows in the direction of Goldinerod. Prince Dinge stood to her side.
Father may want the castle destroyed, but I'll do him one better. This is the fate of those who humiliate Pagus' house.
pulling the bowskeins in one hand to a tension that would have taken a dozen men on a siege Scorpio. Selva took aim. Before shooting, she muttered some low incantation, and the harpoon-sized arrow began to blaze with blue fire. She then loosed the arrow, causing a sound wave several times the piercing shriek of a whip crack. The arrow soared towards Goldenrod, and upon contact, a massive explosion of blue fire in the shape of a mushroom eradicated several blocks of houses. I stood terrified as Regent Mother Selva loosed another and another.
Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell Bakshi along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. Or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.